Good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's edition of Shop Talk, hosted by the Triangle Area SQL Server Users Group. So, with me tonight, we have, as quite often, Mala Mahadevan. How you doing, Mala?
Hey, good morning. Good morning, everyone. Good evening, everyone.
It's morning
Sorry.
somewhere.
Yes.
And also, Mike Christensen. How you doing, Mike?
Doing very well, Kevin. Hi, Mala. Hi, Kevin. Thanks.
Hello.
So, is it now Tuesday morning for you, Mike, or did we just get pulled back into Monday morning?
Back in the good old EST.
8 more hours of work. It's like the terrible side of Groundhog's Day.
Exactly.
The boss saw a shadow. It's 8 more hours of work. So we have for tonight one major topic that came in from a member of the group and thought was a really good topic. So wanted to dive into it some. And that topic is all about choosing skills. So when it comes to deciding what technology or data skill you wish to learn next, what's your process? And Mala and Mike both have spent a lot of time learning, a lot of time picking up new skills. And so it's a great opportunity to talk about some of that stuff. Who wants to take it away? As everybody looks away awkwardly.
I can start.
Go for it, Mala.
So, I personally, I'm a sort of a learning geek. I keep watching something or trying to pick up something almost on a daily basis, but I don't think everybody should be like that. Um, what my preferences are, though, when it comes to specific focused learning, is definitely number one criteria is what is needed at work. Like currently I'm working on a PowerShell project, so I try to watch and learn as much PowerShell as I can. That is definitely my criteria. Number two is what are the skills that someone similar in my role and my degree of experience is expected to have in the market. So I'm a database engineer and I've been in this role for 3 years. So I go out there and I look to see what are the skills expected of database engineers. So some programming in C sharp, maybe, and R or Python, and non-SQL Server databases. Those are some of the areas that I need to get better at. So those go on the list and not in any particular order. It is very difficult. The more structured you get about these plans, the less likely they're going to work out. But I just keep a rough list of that. And I try to find gaps in my schedule to learn whenever I can, because sticking to a rigid schedule does not work for me. I've tried that before and it rarely works. Like usually I can go 3 or 4 days with it and then, I slip away from it and it doesn't work. So whenever, typically my time to watch something is when I take my meals or on a weekend, sometimes when the weather is bad and I have nothing to do outside and stuff like that. So trying to find small gaps is how typically it works. So that's a starter.
All right, so summarizing it up, learn what you have to do for work. Makes a lot of sense. Learn what you would expect the average person in your role, position, point in time, life to understand. And find times when it's amenable to learning. Is that a fair summarization?
Yes.
Great. This will be on the test, everybody. So, Mike, you've recently gotten into the SQL world. You've recently gotten into some of the sides of, say, data analytics. And the question is, when you started making that pivot, what drove you to learn specific things?
So that's a great question, and you all played a big role in that. So I kind of joined in 2018, and You all were very welcoming, and I just made a decision professionally that I was going to try to double down on my SQL skills. I do use it every day, but I always would come across things. I work with data, do operational analysis. I get data for clients, and then I come across something that I'm just like, wow, what is that? I don't even know what that is. So I said, this is my profession. I'd like to get better at it. And so I think that Mala had a really great point, which is like adjacency. So I said, well, I'm already all right at SQL and people do that for a career. I'm going to learn more about that. And so coming to, on that topic of adjacency, so I can practice it. I know how to, whereas it can be a little bit more of a hurdle to practice. Where do you start if you want to learn C? Like, where do you start? Like, that's a big problem. And I think the thing for me about what you're going to learn is sticking with stuff. So I feel like for me, one night you taught us how to use Visual Studio, and we did machine learning on predicting the Buffalo Bills wins and losses. And that was awesome for me because I don't usually use Visual Studio. Now I try it more, but I'm kind of like been sticking with like window functions, and I actually used that today. I used lead and lag to solve a problem that in 2018 I could have used, but I didn't know. Or I had heard of it, but I'd never used it. And I literally used it today. I was like, oh, no problem. Lead and lag, that'll solve this, right? So that's been rewarding. And I think that having someone like colleagues like you or people outside of work that have knowledge that you can ask, you don't want to overwhelm them. So I think that being near a person at work who is good at all kinds of programming, like that helps me too. Like some places you might not work with people who are proficient in a thing. So sometimes just the experience that you have working with other people might point you to a new technology. But for me, I think that the other thing is trying to create a personal project, like Mala had said, PowerShell. So I was working on a personal project with my own movies, and I was trying to make backups, and I learned RoboCopy because I just needed to solve a task, right? Like, but the example when I don't learn well or don't retain things well is I created a virtual box Linux environment. I started learning the Linux command line, and I don't use it very often in my day to day. And so I worked on it for weeks, and I did some practice and tried to understand like what parts of the commands are optional, et cetera. And I didn't follow through. so the adjacency has really been helpful.
Yeah, that also makes a lot of sense. So, quick summarization. You got sorry, I just gotta ban a person real fast. Come on.
But I do want to be famous.
There we go. Actually, Mala, would you be able to move that from chat? I'm having some trouble deleting it at the moment.
Let me look and I'll remove it now. Hold on.
All right. So while that's going on, quick summarization. Learn things that are near to what you already know. Learn things that, again, pretty close to what you're working with today. And also have that network of people. It's really good to be able to ask somebody, talk to somebody, and say, hang on, I know there's a good way to do this. And you find out the way to do it, and hopefully you pick up something interesting in the process. So I think those are both really good approaches. I'm going to take an interesting side approach. I'm going to hit it en passant. And that is to build a not to-do list. So it sounds a little funny, but I think it's an interesting idea when I learned about it. So we all build, well, many of us build to-do lists. What do I need to do? Or I'm going to get into this role. What types of things do I need to learn about? What types of things do I need to focus on? And similarly important is, what do I not want to do? My time is precious. I only have so many things that I can learn, so much capacity to learn. And you can get stuck going down a lot of side angles where, what programming language should I learn? Well, let me find the couple hundred most popular programming languages, and you will find people advocating for every one of them. And I'm sure they're all wonderful programming languages. But many of them, put them on your not to-do list. If you have no expectation that you're going to use them in a work environment, if you have no interest in learning them as an academic pursuit, if effectively you're not going to get much value out of it, and you can use the time more effectively elsewhere, just tell yourself, I'm not going to do that. Even if it sounds interesting. You know, like, for example, Golang is kind of an interesting language. It is currently on my not-to-do list because I have other interests in other areas. That's not a knock on Golang. I think that it is a fine language that certainly solves a lot of problems, and people I know who do use it enjoy it quite a bit. So if you are one of those people who loves Golang or who wants to learn it, that's not me at all saying don't learn it. I'm not advocating against it. It is instead saying, look, I've only got so many hours in the day. I'm not going to be able to learn it. It doesn't fit in with what I need. And that's where you get to, well, what do you need? And I think that, yeah, understanding what do I do at work, and also what would I like to do? Those are two big questions. I like Mala's interpretation of what is it that a reasonable person might expect from me, knowing that this is what I aspire to be or currently am. Like, if I am a database developer, what types of things would people reasonably expect me to know? And I should at least have a decent understanding of that. If I'm getting paid to do certain activities, I should understand those reasonably well. And Solomon says, Perl was on my not-to-do list, and so far I've been very successful. See, yeah, Perl's another language where...
I also like the idea of a limited to-do list too, Kevin. Like, certain things I want to learn only up to a certain level. Like, for example, Git. I have no intention of learning, all the ins and outs of Gits and trying to resolve every merge conflict and stuff like that. Most places I worked at, they have people dedicated to that, and you can go to them for help if you need to. As long as I can do my day-to-day tasks reasonably well without, asking for help, I'm okay. I don't want to get too deep into it. It's just not in my line of interest, or that's kind of what, and I feel the same way about maybe even SSIS to some degree. Is I know basics and I know how to get by building packages. I'm not, I don't want to be another Randy Leonard or somebody who knows that, extremely thoroughly well. It's not in my line of interest, that's all.
Yeah, that's also perfectly reasonable. How deep do you want to get into something? Because you don't have to be the world's foremost expert on everything. There's no way that you can be. And so it's perfectly fine, again, to say, I want to be mediocre at this thing because I would rather specialize in these things. Perl, by the way, that's another interesting language where I would like to learn it, but I realize I just don't have the time necessary to learn it well. And so it's on my don't learn list. I probably even have a book on Perl that I've picked up a while ago. And I should also note that the not to-do list is not permanent. It is something that can change over time, just like a to-do list. I found this new language, and therefore I want to learn it. Or this new technique that I want to learn. But similarly, I can add things to the not to do. I can take them off of the not to do. Maybe there's a platform which is not yet mature enough, and so I'm not going to learn it. I'm expressly going to avoid it until it gets more mature, and I can look into it and say, oh, all right, well, now it's ready for prime time. And Chris says, sounds like not to do is anything that is not adjacent. Not necessarily. There's a lot of knots in there. So you can have something on your to-do list which is completely non-related to your current position or even where you want to go. It can be an academic interest. For example, before, let's say I could pick something like functional programming languages. Now, as a data platform person, I am going to lay out that functional programming languages are good to know and that they make a lot of sense for data platform-minded people. But you can find a lot of people who are interested in functional programming, learn languages like Haskell or Scala, and never use them in their jobs. And in that case, you have something which is not really adjacent, but still of interest. Similarly, somebody might be really interested in neural networks as a concept. They want to learn a lot about it, but don't necessarily want to work in machine learning. They're just kind of interested in it. And, this is where you'll find things more like, I'm probably dating myself terribly here, Lego Mindstorms or something else where people will dive into a topic just for personal gratification. And that's perfectly reasonable. It's all about trade-offs. If I want to dive into this thing, I understand that perhaps I cannot use this directly in a work experience, but not everything has to be about work, and it certainly doesn't have to be about the current job. And Mike says here, JavaScript, maybe spend time on TypeScript or Blazor. Yeah, those are both good technologies, by the way, and both are kind of on my to-do list, though so far down that they're probably effectively on a not to do. But yeah, it's the risk of missing out, that fear of missing out is something a lot of people have, and the not to do list is sort of your way of indicating that, no, if I miss out, I don't care. I don't have to be on the forefront of everything. There will be things that come up that I will look at and say, well, shoot, I wish I'd gotten in on that. But quite as often, probably more often, there are things that come up like, well, glad I didn't learn that, or wish I didn't learn that. Because
So
I
that's kind of my
dedicated 6
take
months of
with
my
the
life into this
whole-
thing that got dumped after one release.
That's kind of my take with the whole containers thing too, Kevin. Is that I know at some point I may have to learn this. I just don't think it's right now. And I'm willing to wait and be, somebody who does not know that until such time when it becomes the norm. And that's okay. I mean, I don't see a whole lot of practical use to it to me right now to just spend all my energy trying to learn that.
Yeah, that's fair. And, I can lay out
Yeah.
the case for containers, but it's a little kind of to the side of tonight's discussion. But no, it's a perfectly reasonable take on it, and where I could just as easily say, I love containers because it helps me solve these particular cases and makes my life easier in these ways. But there's a lot of my's and I's and me's in that statement. And that is something that we have to think about, the normative aspects of learning, that what I want to learn, what I find fulfilling, is not necessarily the same as the next person. And that level of fulfillment is something that we should think about. And I know I keep cutting you off, Mike, so what's up?
I was gonna say on a couple points. one thing that I was going to say is that just-in-time learning is a phrase that I didn't come up with. I've heard it from someone, which is this take on the Japanese just-in-time inventory. And you learn what you need to, especially for your job. And you had made a point earlier about, and sometimes you might have a hobby, like I'm going to make a website. Well, I don't do that at work. I do a lot of SQL, but you might have a hobby that's adjacent that you want to learn. But so I think just-in-time learning is something that is a little bit related to the no list, which is like I'm going to learn it when I need to. I'm gonna play around with a Docker container next week, because that would help or whatever. One thing I wanted to say about prioritization of like what you want to learn that has helped me a lot, because that question is so good, because I sweat this because I've benefited so much from the SQL TriPass, this group, because I have the most to learn. But one of the things that helped me with FOMO is that I've learned that people can do the same thing with different tools. So short example is like everybody's doing Python, and it under the hood, from my understanding, my limited understanding, it might be less verbose. You can do things in less. If you C#, it's like a little bit more verbose, but at the same time, C# has got a lot of momentum, and C#9, I think, has some of the features of Python where you don't have to write as much, or you don't have to declare as much or whatever. So it's like, if you're good at C#, you can do a lot of stuff. You don't necessarily need to learn 9 other languages, because you can accomplish a lot. And that helped me as the learner to say, okay, yeah, everybody's talking about, Scala programmers make a ton, or if you want to be hardcore, learn C, because then you'll understand the other languages better. For me, I'm like, okay, I got to stick with something. And then when you get that confidence where you actually do something, you're like, oh, I'm in Visual Studio and I made something, and I made an ASP app that does something. You give yourself that confidence to keep going.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. And understanding that different tools, different platforms can still achieve the same goals, that sort of metastasizing of concept makes, I think it makes you a better person as a than the dive in. That last sentence made no sense. I'm gonna check to make sure I'm not smelling toast. So let me try to rephrase it without sounding quite as strange. What I'm trying to get at is that as you realize that you can solve this problem in different ways with different techniques, with different tools, and still achieve the same purposes, your understanding of that, the more you understand that, the better off you're going to be in the long run, because you'll be able to start applying things more quickly as a result. And I think the unfortunate thing is I kind of get the feeling that just-in-time learning is detrimental in that respect. So at least the way that I'm thinking of the term, because the shallow answer of just-in-time learning is, let me go find it on Stack Overflow. So Stack Overflow driven development. And a lot of us do it a lot of the time, but the problem is that you don't necessarily learn. You may solve the specific problem. You may figure out what incantation gets you the result, but you don't understand the why at nearly as often, and also have a really difficult time understanding the underpinnings which drive this. Occasionally there will be really good Stack Overflow answers that dive into some of the concept and really help you understand the nature of the problem a lot better. But most often it's, I click this thing, I expected 6, I didn't get back 6, and the answer is because you need to set this configuration setting, and now it's 6. But although I've solved that specific problem, it doesn't necessarily apply to the next similar problem. And if that's the nature of just-in-time learning, then it's useful for getting the job done, but it doesn't help with growth the way that something as a more structural learning can do.
Right.
So I think there's a
Well,
lot of space for both of those.
and I'm so glad you said that, because that was from an entrepreneurial context that I used to hear that a lot, which is like, you learn what you need to when you need to. But like, I'm on this track more of less of an entrepreneur, more like trying to get that deep learning and that satisfaction. So when I know how to do queries, but like, I don't necessarily understand set theory. And just by learning some basics, I improved my skills, my time spent, my job satisfaction by understanding search arguments, by understanding, that sets are not ordered. Like, those things have made a big difference in my life, where that deep learning has been very beneficial for me and for my work. And where the just in time learning that I've done for a lot of my career, like, I don't know, I don't even know if, like, so query ran long, I wouldn't necessarily know why. Well, it doesn't need an order by, it doesn't need an order by, don't ever use it. Don't ever use an order by if you don't have to. So yeah, that's a really good point.
I like learning in small nuggets compared to, like, getting a big fat book out and trying to get through it from page to page, especially when it comes to tech learning. Like, um, the blog post series, like either the stairways or like my friend Hugo Cornelius is doing an excellent series on execution plans. So you learn a little bit of that every week or every time he puts a new blog post out, and that kind of adds up over time. And that, to me, my way of learning, that is much easier than trying to learn big chunks of information at the same time, or going after, some people try to learn, like, I want to learn everything about the apply clause today, so go google that word and try to read everything that comes up and stuff like that. I can't retain anything that I learn in that manner at all.
Yeah, no, I get that. I will have a uh, driving point off of that topic because it actually leads to something I want to mention. But Raj has a question that I wanted to answer here. Working toward company objectives or working toward current market trends on learning new languages or tools or databases? Which ones do you pick? So, company objectives, market trends. And Mala, your answer was has to be both. So, take care of your job as well as your future, but it's easier said than done. Yeah, my thought is, do think of it in the terms of, am I currently doing well enough at my job that I'm not at risk of losing it? And if that answer is no, then 100% focused on that job. I need to get out of a hole. If I'm at a place where, okay, I understand well enough what's going on, I can maybe implement some improvements, but that I'm in a fairly stable place, that's where you cut the numbers down a bit. I think that, you still spend a pretty good amount of time on company objective learning. So what types of things will help this company be better? The good news is that many of these things do carry over to other firms in at least the same industry and probably other industries as well. So if you're a database developer, for example, you do want to learn the domain of your company. And you may say, well, if I go to another company, all that information is lost. All that information is useless. I don't think that's true. If you stay within the industry, maybe some terms are different, but there's a lot of overlap. Even between industries, the skills you develop in learning domain modeling, in learning some of the specifics of my firm, will carry over to other places as well. You're able to abstract out the most interesting pieces from the particulars of that firm. And I think that helps out that kind of helps drive the process that, or the thought that I should spend a lot of time focusing on doing the best that I can for this company while spending a lot of time doing the work that I think is best for me in the long term. And part of this is that, the relationship between your employer and you, this is not a marriage. This is not forever. This is not 20 years. This isn't you work 25 years, get a golden watch, and retire. This is a contractual arrangement that is based on intentionally a fairly short time frame, maybe 3 years, 5 years, 7 years. So during that time, you want to give as much as is reasonable. So I'm not saying shortchange the company and your learning objectives. And if you are closer to that edge of failure, definitely focus more time on there. But if you are well beyond that failure limit, then this is a good opportunity to learn what else is available to me. What will I need to know in the next position? And that next position could be within the same company. So you may go from, I'm working as a back-end application developer, but then you realize I'd love to be a database administrator. And you start learning database administration stuff, and then eventually you might switch into that role for the same firm. So even if you're learning it for current market trends or learning it for personal interest, it's still not lost, in scare quotes, from the standpoint of the company necessarily. So Solomon has an answer, not learning from Stack Overflow answers. That's why I've tried to, as often as possible, spend the time to add the why or theory to my answers, and yet have been told by people that my answers are too long and that, quote, most people don't have the time to read and just want the answer, unquote. To which Solomon replies, quote, well, then they'll just be right back here rather than potentially being able to handle the next problem on their own, unquote. Exactly. And Solomon has some of the longest, most interesting, in-depth answers on DBA Stack Exchange and Stack Overflow. And that's absolutely right. I understand Stack Overflow is not a place you go when you're expecting an essay. And that said, you should at some point look for the essays. I think that in a lot of cases, our development is so hyper-focused on, I have this error message right now, how do I get past this error message? Or I need this line of code, where can I copy and paste it? That we don't understand, and it's effectively magic. Like I joked, it's incantations that you put down, and magically they work. And how does it work? I don't know. And we're worse off for that because we think we know. There are a lot of application developers that if I locked you in a room with just a word processor and said, I need you to create this, that they wouldn't be able to get started. Because, well, I normally have internet access. Yeah, that's so that you can Google all of the answers. And in that case, why am I paying you what I'm paying you?
Yeah.
At the same time, I don't expect this, like, you have to have programs that you can code in your head and have nothing else. But being able to do something, if I show you a segment of code and say, I'm having trouble with this, can you help me out with it? Being able to articulate what could be wrong with it, and even if you don't have the answer, at least understanding enough about the process that I can see how this code works, and I can create conjectures about how it may be wrong and how one might correct it. All of that stuff is something that you can't just learn by muddling through, at least not easily.
In total agreement, and I think that those long answers are great. I remember vividly there was an example. I don't use write out or joins, but read a really good thing in Stack Overflow that was long, but someone had taken the time to write an example where right order join could be useful, and where a gotcha could really get you if you don't understand how and why you could use it. And I appreciate people like Solomon putting the time in to help people like me to understand those things, and that they're very valuable.
Yeah, yeah. Now, one other bit that I want to hit on. Actually, let's go to the next part of Chris's question. Do you base your decisions on technology on what looks great? What could be good for a given task at your job? What tool or language appears to be most in demand? The answer is yeah, sometimes. So, what do you base your decisions on? And I'll go first this time. I will split this between algorithms and technologies. Algorithms, I tend to look for older and more academic algorithms. And by that, what I mean is I'm going to look for algorithms that have been around for a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades. There is benefit in that in a couple of senses. First, the first person to describe an algorithm is usually not the best person to describe the algorithm. They're simply the first one who articulated it. After that, you get a chance for everybody else to read, internalize, and recapitulate. So you'll have a much better chance of finding somebody who's able to explain this with eloquence. Also, part of why I enjoy seeing several people's takes on a given thing, because the first 3 may not click mentally, but then that fourth iteration, that fourth version of an explanation, I understand the metaphor, or I think that they describe it in just the right way. It connects with something that I have learned in the past, and now I get this thing better than I did before. The other reason is that many times new algorithms, or when an algorithm is new, it is interesting because of its novelty, not because of its quality. As an example, there is a branch of algorithms that I love in the analytics world called online passive-aggressive algorithms. I love them not only because of the name, but also because they are very effective at what they do. And there is an implementation which has been around for a little while, at the very least 8 years. And then there have been quite a few papers since then that say we make this online passive-aggressive algorithm better by doing this change. Well, a couple of years back, we were working on a project and implemented 3 of those recent papers. Implemented them in Python, implemented them in... Actually, I think we did them all in Python. And it wasn't even about performance. It was about accuracy. And the new algorithms were not more accurate. Sometimes they were less accurate. Other times they were the same level of accuracy. The algorithm is much more accurate on this very specific use case that the academics put out, that if you use this data set, then this version, this variant of an online passive-aggressive algorithm is 4% better. Or it's 80% better in this very specific case, but then you try to apply it to anything else and it's actually worse. And that's something you will run into a lot with algorithms. The ones that tend to have staying power are ones that are more generally workable. They work more often in more circumstances. And the ones that stick around for a while work enough that it doesn't make sense to rip them out of the product. So from that you can infer at least some people find it useful enough to work with, and that it's practical enough to continue developing and maintaining. So that's why for algorithms, I tend to focus on things that have been around for longer. In the security world, there's actually an interesting trade-off. where some, say, cryptographic hashing algorithms, you don't tend to trust an algorithm until it's been around for a decade. So Argon, the Argon 2 series of algorithms, I think they're just coming up on a decade. And until recently, you really didn't see them in action, even though they are considerably better than something like bcrypt. Bcrypt still is very popular because bcrypt's been around for quite some time. And in the security world, specifically, that you've been around for a long time and nobody has found a way to substantially weaken the algorithm to the point where it's easily breakable is a big positive. So that something is 30 years old is a net benefit. Something like AES as an algorithm. That, or a series of algorithms, the fact that it has been around, that it has staying power, is by itself a virtue. And the fact that I can come up with some new algorithm doesn't necessarily mean that I, as a regular practitioner, want to spend a lot of time, invest a lot of time in it. This is a bit different if I were an, say, a PhD in cryptology, or if I spent a lot of time working with those algorithms. If I worked for Department of Defense in the group that works with these, in that case, yeah, I absolutely want to understand state of the art. But outside of those specific scenarios, I don't really care, because it's going to be a decade before I see them in commercial products. And it's going to be a decade before anybody trusts that there's not a big gaping hole that researchers just haven't found yet. So on algorithms, bias toward old. Technologies, bias toward new. And Mala's mentioned blogs and tutorials. Mike's mentioned shorter learning. I would bias toward that type of learning for a newer technology to give you tips and ideas. When we're talking algorithms, when we're talking concepts, I would bias more toward books, more toward longer form learning. Academic courses can be quite helpful in this regard. And those lay out the foundational framework where if I understand, for example, the academic side of data architecture, I can take a SQL database and hopefully have a better idea of what's going on and understand that, okay, SQL Server has its own specific points of interest, so I can't strictly apply academic to practical. But by seeing this here, I can say, oh, I understand why this is happening. I understand why you use this type of index in this scenario. That is because of this underpinning.
Yes, Kevin, I completely agree. Conceptual, to understand algorithms, I think books are really good, and academic type of courses.
Yeah, and another way of rephrasing this is that you have a lifespan of information. And for things like algorithms, which have lifespans in decades or possibly centuries, books make a lot of sense here, because I can write a book and it'll still be useful. I could go back and read Dijkstra's work. Academic articles sometimes make a lot of sense here. Again, go back and read some of Dijkstra's works from the 60s and 70s. I can read different theoretical or practical implementations and understandings. Like my favorite book on database development, of relational development, was published in 1985. All of the implementation stuff you just ignore. That is for historical purposes only, because it tells you how to implement an Oracle from the mid-'80s. None of that's useful today. However, the first half of that book is gold, because it does an outstanding job of explaining the concepts. And the question of what books, there's a lot. Yeah, Mala's got the right follow-up. For which subject? There are a lot of these types of books. Even in the architecture world, there you get into specifics of if you're talking database architecture, if you're talking software architecture, clean code, if you're talking domain modeling, data-driven design. Euler's method was a plot point in a recent NASA movie. It was old, but it worked. Hey, the Newtonian calculation for estimating, I think it was estimating. It's a solver function, and it's not perfect. It's a little step function that may be slow, but it does work really well for a lot of cases. And considering that it's named Newtonian, around for a minute. Actually, on this a little bit, I do want to mention, go outside your normal realm. Chris had the question / comment earlier that is it that you want to kind of stick to what's adjacent, and I would say no, go way beyond what you would normally learn, and that includes getting the things literature, history, philosophy. I think I just made Solomon happy right there, because I want to talk about the Sherlock Holmes effect. So the Sherlock Holmes effect is somewhat true. The characterization. If you read the books, Holmes is described as somebody who is hyper focused on very specific details. Like, he knew all of the flavors, smells, and looks of different tobaccos in London, but he did not know how to, or whether the moon orbited the Earth, if the Earth orbited the sun, if the sun orbited the Earth. He didn't care about any of that stuff. And so the description of him was that within his specialization, within his understanding, he had this insanely deep, to the point of absurd, understanding of particular details. But if it did not directly relate to what he did not interest him at all, and couldn't have cared less. He did not know. And I think that happens to us on a lesser extent in the business world. We tend to understand that time on task and focus on an area do help you get better, but we don't realize that if you spend all of your time diving into this little tiny piece, you will miss the broader world around you. And the Germans, of course, have a great word for it, Fachidiot. You are a subject matter expert who has no understanding or bearing on anything else. And this is where you get to the person who's doing a PhD on, like, 16th century Flemish architecture in moderately sized cities that are bordering on a river. And that person will know everything about 16th century Flemish architecture in moderate-sized cities bordering on a river, but they don't know anything else in this world. And that's not going to be great for your growth potential. Because if the world turns and suddenly people aren't quite as interested in Renaissance Flemish architecture, or I guess technically it would be pre-Renaissance Flemish architecture, then you don't have many job prospects in the future. And that's obviously stretching it a bit, but if you think about, I focus solely, I only work with SQL Server 2005, but I know SQL Server 2005 inside and out. There will come a time when those skills aren't that important anymore. (2005 SP3). Yeah, exactly. Or that I am the best DTS expert around. And you can make a killing in that. And this is the the risk prospect of being a consultant, because if you are a consultant, then you can benefit. You actually benefit more from specialization. Having a generalist consultant, usually it's hard for that person to find work because there's always somebody better at whatever topic. Generalist employees tend to work better, but specialist consultants. So if you want to work in consulting, yeah, I have to be an expert on this thing. And being an expert on an aging technology can technically work out pretty well. And it can work at least for a while, but there comes a point when, like I mentioned, being that knowledgeable person in DTS doesn't help you anymore. That it's time you can pivot to something else. Are you saying that PHP devs should maybe learn another language? I'm biting my tongue. I was going to say something very mean about PHP. Although I have had an opportunity to get back to it after quite a few years off from PHP. And it's all, if you use only the modern PHP, then it's almost a real language. Older PHP, it was like, we have a function that does this. And then somebody puts in a new function that does almost exactly the same thing, but it's completely different casing. It's completely different nomenclature. I used underscores. Well, I used camel case, and I'm using Pascal case. And I've decided to put the noun in front of the verb or the verb in front of the noun. And I think my favorite one was calling a database where I want to prevent SQL injection. And there are 3 separate functions, including the one that's essentially a safe call to the database. And then that one turned out not to be safe. And so you had the 3rd really safe call to the database. And this stuff happens. Again, if you are a PHP developer, I'm mostly just doing a little friendly ribbing. I worked with Cold Fusion long enough ago that I don't think I stand on a podium and can tell you which languages are terrible because I worked with Cold Fusion.
I was just going to say on the overall topic that you brought up, for me, it's like a weighted average, right? So like for me, like if work's using it, great, that's like a point. And then if it has traction, like so C# and Python, a lot of people are using them. So that's a good investment. But like you brought up Perl, I probably wouldn't learn Perl right now. But I wouldn't mind learning a little bit of C or F# because just for my basic understanding, like learning those is good because they're more functional, and then you understand how Python and C# do some of the things that they do because of the other languages. So I have like a list, and then market leaders helps too. Like I know Tableau, I know a little bit of Power BI, but I probably wouldn't spend a lot of time continuing to learn about business objects or ClickView because they're becoming big time market leaders and they're very versatile. Yeah, so that's kind of my little short take on like, for me, it's kind of like ticking some boxes for me, in addition to the FOMO starting to diminish because you realize you can do different things. But for me, it's kind of like a mix of market leader. I can practice at work. I know people who can help me if I get stuck.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Also, I do want to mention that many of these pieces of advice come from the notion of where you're at and where you want to be, because that will change over time. So there may be a time in your life where I need to focus entirely on this stuff related to my present job. And you may shift over time to where I want to focus on something else. Looking at market leaders, especially if I'm looking to make myself more enticing on a job market, then that could be where you're looking at what technologies are currently interesting, what technologies are currently attractive, and trying to apply which of these technologies could be a good fit for me in the future, or might I bring to my current organization as a mode of improvement.
This is super important, right? Because I spent money on coding school, and it was super awesome. I learned a lot, but it was mostly web development, and that I learned from that. So like I am not super artistic. I do music, but like I'm not like a hardcore web developer and don't really want to be. I really like learning from you all about data clusters and how to help data science. And I'm not a statistician, but like helping those projects get better and clean data. Like I enjoy that and I'm learning about it. So like I'm like all in on Jupyter notebooks and Azure Data Studio notebooks. Like I'm like, that is something I'm definitely on my list to get better at, because a lot of people are using it in the data science space, and I should understand how it works and maybe be able to set them up for people. So good point.
Yeah. Yeah. By the way, as far as GraphQL goes, nope, that's not an interest of mine. Although Mala, GraphQL is a little different from graph databases. GraphQL is the API. It's an API language that's used, for example, when you're hitting Microsoft or Facebook APIs.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, despite it having a name that makes it sound like graph database, it's just completely unrelated to graph database. But
Thank you,
but
Kevin. I didn't know that. Yeah.
Mala did mention, yeah, she does have some good experience working with graph concepts and graph databases, or at least in SQL. Last thing I want to call out. How much time goes into external learning?
What does external mean?
Basically, oh, that's a good question. So, what I'll say is make an hour a day for work. If you have to set up a meeting, I have very important meetings. Set up that meeting, spend that hour a day working, learning. There, you can focus a lot of that on the type of stuff that you want to learn about for work. But Chris gave clarification outside of work hours. And yeah, it will depend. It's going to depend on how much time you have available. But how much time would you put into external learning?
For me
So
to
I like to learn something new every week. And if my schedule is not terribly chaotic, I try to narrow it down to one new thing, something new every day. But that's hard to keep up with. So I've gotten it down to every week. So what did I learn? I keep a little diary and say what new thing did I learn about PowerShell this week, or what new thing did I learn about what execution plans this week, or whatever 2 or 3 items that are on top of my list. And I try to find gaps in where I can squeeze in some learning, like when I work out sometimes, or when I'm eating a meal, watching some sort of a presentation or something like that. So it's easier to get little chunks of learning in than it is to find big chunks of time to devote to it. That is just me. And if I can get something done parallelly with it, like something dumb, maybe like ironing my clothes, or cutting vegetables or something of that sort, then that helps too.
Yeah, I agree with that idea a lot. Viable Clan Member says 6 hours a day. I'm with you. Let's do this. And my follow up on what Mala was saying is that you put in time, but remember, you really have to do things. And what I mean is that the mind does need a break. And when I say do things, physical activity, mowing the lawn, working out, doing things physically, because if you spend 8 hours a day working, mostly like sitting at a desk thinking, and then you try to spend another 5 hours a day outside of work, still trying to exercise the same mental faculties, that can wear you down quite a bit. And 5-mile runs, yeah, if I don't know that I've run 5 miles in my life, but
unless somebody's chasing.
exactly. But yeah, no, that's another way to do it, because what happens
that's partly why. Go on, Kevin.
Oh, what happens is that you give your brain a break, you give it a chance to kind of percolate, You also open up the opportunity for learning in slightly different ways. You open up the opportunity for learning some of those other things outside your normal realm, and you can focus on the other mental centers. In total, kind of a joke, but kind of real. I don't tend to run. I don't know. That's why man invented the wheels, so we don't have to run.
So part of the reason I really love podcasts is this, because when you're taking a walk or when you're doing something, you can keep listening to stuff and you don't have to hang on to every word. Even a few sentences that get your attention means you've learned something new, and you can multitask very easily with the podcast running. Like you may be going
Yep.
for a drive somewhere or, doing some exercise or whatever. So find out
Yeah.
all the podcasts with subjects that interest you. They are a great way to learn.
Yeah, and usually podcasts are at a slightly different level than what you would be reading, for example. You tend to have things that are cued in at a different level of explanation, of understanding. It's more of storytelling and vocalization versus when you're reading blog posts or you're reading books, and it tends to be much more formal and stepwise driven. And my closing point, so that was basically my closing point there, where the mind does need a break. Physical activity helps you get that break and can give you the opportunity to switch things up a little. I think that's probably the biggest piece of advice that I've got is switch things up. Don't be stuck in on this is what I know for my job because I need to know these things. And don't be that fachidiot, because even if you are working on a technology, even if you are sure that you're never going to leave this industry, leave this job, it's still good as a person to have a broader understanding of things, to be able to analyze, articulate, and come to conclusions on things outside of the incredibly narrow sphere of what you do on a daily basis at work. So I would get off of my soapbox, but then I would be shorter. So I'm just going to stand on it and say, thanks so much for stopping in today for Shop Talk, everybody. Great discussion. Yes, I completely agree with Chris. This has been some awesome discussion, not just but how we can learn. And I hope that people took a little bit out of this. Tended to be very normative in nature here. A lot of expression of thoughts and opinions. Of course, if you disagree, let us know. If you agree, also let us know. I definitely will print out the ones that agree with me and hang them on my wall. So with that, thank you, Mala. Thank you, Mike. And we'll catch you all in 2 weeks. Remember, tomorrow, Shabnam Watson is talking to us about Power BI for the Business Intelligence subgroup. So come by, check that out, 6 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow. And till next time, everybody, have a great evening or morning.